This one for me is all about personal taste. I, for one, was not a big fan of 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man because not only was it another superhero origin story with a laughable third act, but it tried way too hard to turn Spider-Man into this dark, tragic hero. Its tone was way too dark. Half the time I felt like I was watching a Batman film as opposed to a Spider-Man film. Spider-Man, in my opinion, should be light and campy because it deals with a nerdy teenage boy fighting villains who dress like rhinos, goblins, octopuses, grizzly bears, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, bumblebees, etc. It should be comical. Plus, we've already seen Spider-Man's origin story. Sure, you're welcome to try and tell it again, but at least bring something new to the table. The 2012 version followed the same plot as the 2002 version, right down to the climactic fight between the main villain and the hero. But I digress. Back to the 2002 version. Whenever I talk to the fans, they all say that the Sam Raimi films pay more tribute to the 60s comics as opposed to the new ones. I myself prefer the 60s version of Spider-Man because for me, it really is definitive. And, growing up with the 60s TV show, I really did want to see that version of Spider-Man on the big screen as opposed to the dark emo punk seen in the comics nowadays. And boy, did this film deliver just that. They even get the classic "with great power comes great responsibility" line thrown in there. Totally epic, dude! Tobey Maguire really was the perfect fit for this version of Spider-Man. Again, I say this version of Spider-Man. He's a nerd with a heart of gold. He might act like a Boy Scout at times, but at least he isn't afraid of kicking the crap out of some thugs trying to rape his woman. He simply wants to do what's right. Andrew Garfield is the better Peter Parker / Spider-Man? Pfft, not for me. I grew up with Tobey Maguire, and I do not think he can be topped. He just fits the bill. Willem Dafoe is perfectly fine as Norman Osborn / Green Goblin. Sure, he's over the top and campy, but you can't seriously look me in the eye and say that that's not who the Green Goblin is. From what I remember, the Green Goblin was always this power-obsessed, eccentric businessman who puts his work in front of his own family. He wears that goofy costume because it creates an image, that even though he might look silly on the outside, he is still a dangerous criminal at heart. He's like Spider-Man's Joker. He's flamboyant, wildly extroverted, and sensationally over the top. Also, I really don't mind the Power Rangers costume they put on him. Sure, the original design was much more faithful, but I still don't mind this costume simply because Dafoe still gets the attitude of the Goblin down pat. I really think they chose the right cast for this film. The only actor I didn't really warm up to was James Franco. Harry Osborn might be this emotionally abused shut-in, but James Franco could have at least made him an interesting emotionally abused shut-in. Here, he mumbles most of his lines, and when he does raise his voice, it's not that threatening. Sam Raimi was a surprising choice for this film, but he gets the tone absolutely right. It can be dramatic and emotional at times, but it never forgets its comic book roots. It can also be pretty funny. It's a classic tale of a social outcast who has chosen to lead a life he never asked for, but it simply becomes his responsibility. That's why I still love this version over the 2012 one. Plus, I know this could make me biased, but this is the first Spider-Man movie I ever saw in theaters, and it just rocked my world. This is my kind of Spider-Man, folks. End of story. Here's another reason to love Steven Spielberg. He got this freaking film made! When Tommy Lee Jones read the initial script for Men in Black, he said he wasn't interested, declaring that the film did not capture the tone of the comic, but Spielberg promised him that the final script would be an improvement. So, the screenwriter spent months putting together the final film. The final script was enough to convince Tommy Lee Jones to sign on for good. This film actually does indeed have an interesting history. Among the directors approached for the directing position was Quentin Tarantino, who thankfully passed on. Yeah, imagine if the film had been directed by him. We would probably have Will Smith spitting out such badass quips like, "I'm about to go medieval on your slimy green alien ass." It was ultimately Barry Sonnenfeld who took the directing position, and I must say, he does a good enough job balancing the film's mix of science fiction and comedy. In fact, I recently asked a good friend of mine who he thought was the best director for comic book movie adaptations, and he immediately responded, Barry Sonnenfeld, excuse me. I think the reason for his decision is because these Men in Black movies really do give off a cartoonish comic book vibe. Some of the freaking camera angles literally look like pages taken from a comic book. Also, Sonnenfeld was already known for directing darkly humorous films, like The Addams Family. So, they probably chose him because he really was the type of director they needed for this movie. Now, let's talk about what makes the film actually work. Ultimately, it's a combination of the potent chemistry between Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. Also, it's the clever alien designs. These aliens were, for the most part, unlike anything audiences had ever seen before. And to make the main villain a giant cockroach that inhabits a human's body is really stinking clever. And by the way, Vincent D'Onofrio is absolutely priceless as the Bug. When I watch him stumble around trying to appear as a normal human being, I can't help but laugh till my sides hurt. I also got a kick out of Rip Torn as the wisecracking head of MIB. He isn't just this stern, self-absorbed leader who barks commands at his employees all the time. He actually has a couple of good comedic moments. Plus, Rip Torn really knows how to get a laugh out of his audience just by his unique voice. Hysterical. As mentioned earlier though, it is the chemistry between Jones and Smith that gives the movie its juice. Jones is a grumpy veteran who has seen pretty much every alien invasion known to man, so he retains a very professional attitude throughout the film. Smith is a cocky, immature policeman who gets recruited by Jones. The way these two work off each other is side-splitting. Jones is constantly trying to help Smith be mature about the problem at hand, but Smith constantly gets himself into trouble like the hotshot rookie he is. I would say my favorite little comical moment is when Jones gives Smith his first real weapon. And, wouldn't you know it, it turns out to be a puny handgun called the Noisy Cricket. By the way, these weapons are freaking cool. I actually had a toy version of the Neuralizer that I thought would get me out of taking tests in school. But, sadly, it never worked. I'm a huge science fiction fan, so this film really does hold a special place in my heart. It often reminds me of Ghostbusters, but to be honest, I really can't choose between the two. Oh, and since neither of the two sequels made it into the top 10, I will say a thing or two about them. I'll actually make it really easy for you. Men in Black 2 sucked the underside of a dying cow's scrotum, and Men in Black 3 was surprisingly good. There. Now I shouldn't have to go into much more detail than that. Men in Black is a fun thrill ride. It's got funny one-liners, a catchy theme song, and dynamic performances. It really is a blast. Now, please do me a favor and look right here at the tip of this Neuralizer.
Just bounce it with me. Come on, let me see you just slide with me.
I have to admit that I am not the biggest fan of the X-Men series, especially since I had never really been exposed to it at a young age. The only installment I ever saw in theaters was X-Men The Last Stand, which, as you all know, was about as good as getting root canal done without anesthesia. I'm well aware that the others are decent films with good performances, compelling plots, and all that other good stuff. But something about these films never really clicked with me. Maybe it was because I was already so hooked on the Spider-Man series that I didn't really wish to open my heart out to a completely new franchise. When I really think about it though, I think it comes down to the fact that I don't really find many of these characters that interesting. There's obviously a couple of exceptions, like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Patrick Stewart's Professor X, and Ian McKellen's Magneto. But many of the others, like Storm, Cyclops, Sabretooth, Mystique, and Pyro, are all bland caricatures that have little to no background or development. The trailer for this film indicated that we were going to get yet another origin story, except this time it would be the origins of multiple characters, not just one. The action looked explosive, and the performances looked decent, so I was willing to give the film a chance. After all, I really did want to learn more about these characters and what brought them all together. And oh boy, the film wholly exceeded my expectations. Like The Dark Knight, the Spider-Man series, and more recently, The Avengers, the film doesn't just rely on flashy special effects and actually contains some really compelling character development. Despite having more superheroes than 2 Avengers sequels, the film actually manages to flesh out all of its players, giving the audience a chance to care about them and the struggles they are going through. The main focus is on the relationship between Professor X and Magneto, but we also get backgrounds for characters like Mystique, Beast, and even Angel, and they all have internal conflicts within themselves. It's such a joy to see an X-Men film that tries its best to make us care about all of the characters, not just the main players. Michael Fassbender. Here is a gentleman who I believe has the potential to become one of the finest actors of this generation. The first time we see him as Eric Lenschier, he is in a hotel room in Switzerland, glaring mercilessly at the wall in front of him. Fassbender creates a character just with his eyes. This is definitely one of my all-time favorite character introductions. The guitar melody accompanying this scene is absolutely haunting, and the way Fassbender penetrates us with his eyes is a sign that we are in for quite a thrill ride. Speaking of music, I seriously cannot get enough of that badass Magneto theme that composer Henry Jackman wrote for the film. It gets me pumped up every single time I hear it. God, just listen to this exquisite piece of awesomeness. I even listened to it on my iPod while I walked to class in the afternoon. It could possibly be the greatest villain theme since the Empire March from The Empire Strikes Back. The rest of the cast is quite astonishing. James McAvoy is both intelligent and wise as Charles Xavier, a mutant who can read other people's thoughts and control them as well. Another standout is Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. She creates a character that cannot stand the way her mutant body actually looks, so she disguises herself as a pretty blonde. I felt more sympathy towards Mystique here than in the other X-Men movies. Here, she's less of a violent assassin and more like an insecure teenager. She does a tremendous job. Nicholas Hoult as Beast is also respectable. You believe that he's a boy Wunderkind. The X-Men films deal with the difficulty of accepting the fact that society is afraid of what it doesn't understand. Normal human beings are afraid of mutants because they fear their power. It is possible that mutants could eventually use their powers to run normal humans off the face of the earth. This is part of the appeal of X-Men First Class. I also like how it pays tribute to the James Bond films of the 1960s. What's not to like? Tim Burton, for me, has always been a visual director who doesn't exactly put the most coherent stories up on screen, but whether you like the guy or not, you have to admit that he has a unique visual style that is pretty much unlike anything you have ever seen before. There is, however, one film that has a pretty compelling story with characters that will stick in your mind for days to come, and that film is the 1989 benchmark, Batman. The dilemma of Batman is that he's a man constantly haunted by a terrible tragedy that occurred early in his life. He lost a large chunk of his soul after seeing his parents gunned down by a heartless mugger. From then on, he becomes a revenge-obsessed fighting machine with a hunger for justice. He longs to put away criminals before they enact harm upon other innocent civilians. And this film really does capture that dilemma quite well. It's not exactly an origin story, however. We don't see Bruce Wayne go on this journey to become Batman, but I personally like the fact that he's already an established presence. Maybe we don't need to see an origin story because, like the criminals of Gotham, we are intimidated by a man who comes out of nowhere. We know a little bit about his past, which is what makes him, in my opinion, an erratic protagonist. There is no other live-action actor better suited to the role of Batman than Michael Keaton. He is the only live-action Batman to date who can be an intimidating presence just by lurking in the shadows without even batting an eyelash. His very presence causes shivers to run down your spine. Many would argue that the character is boring and uninteresting compared to the Joker, but the thing is that Batman is supposed to be this introverted, mysterious shut-in. He is more about presence and intimidation, not scaring villains with verbal threats. Plus, as you all know, the voice Keaton uses for Batman is natural, ominous, And most important of all, unforced. Here's a Batman who doesn't sound like a chain-smoking gargoyle with a bunch of marbles lodged in his throat. And Bruce Wayne in the comics has to hide the fact he's really Batman by creating a fake public image. He's an immature, irresponsible billionaire playboy. However, Keaton never does that here. That's only one strike against him, though. Jack Nicholson is a creepy, effective Joker. This is definitely a faithful rendition of the Clown Prince of Crime, complete with flowers that shoot acid, electric hand buzzers, and all the other toys that help him wreak havoc. Like Magneto in X-Men First Class, this is also one of my all-time favorite character introductions. And I'm not referring to when he's still Jack Nicholson. Oh no. I'm talking about when we first see him with the Joker image. After being set up by his boss to be killed at a chemical plant, Jack Nicholson goes back to enact his revenge by means of a deadly shootout. We see him lurking in the shadows, almost as if he's a lion anxiously waiting for the right moment to attack his prey. Then, he appears, in all his white-faced glory. Danny Elfman's circus-like theme also helps. It truly is a memorable introduction for this fearsome, unpredictable baddie. I am among the few people who actually prefer this version of Batman to Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins. I could make the argument that Nolan's film is a little too close to reality for my taste, which is why I don't really care for it all that much. But here's the simple truth. Every now and then, I really do like to watch films that actually embrace their supernatural comic book elements, which is exactly what Burton's version of Batman does. The design, the look of the characters, the music, everything about this film screams comic book. And don't get me wrong, I deeply admire Nolan's Batman Begins for bringing respect back to Batman, especially after director Joel Schumacher and screenwriter Akiva Goldsman basically anal raped his image with a 1997 travesty, Batman and Robin. But Burton's Batman is closer to capturing the actual look and spirit of the comic books. It truly is one of my all-time favorite comic book films. The Avengers must have been a huge gamble for Walt Disney Studios. Not only would it combine the main characters from several different films, but it also had an enormous amount of pressure riding its shoulders. An ensemble film of this size and scope had never been attempted before in Hollywood history. Audiences had already been introduced to these superheroes in films like Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America. So there were numerous fans all over the world ready to slit the throats of the Disney executives if the film did not meet their expectations. I, for one, did not think the film was going to work, simply because there were way too many pieces that had to be put in place. Enter Joss Whedon. When this self-proclaimed king of the geeks was hired by Disney to write and direct the film, the initial reaction was that they couldn't have chosen a more perfect individual. He had already made a name for himself by creating such phenomenal television shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He also had experience at bringing such wonderful ensemble pieces like Serenity to life. He's a writer who knows how to balance strong emotions with big, elaborate action sequences. Audiences are well aware that he works hard to deliver films that are crafted with the utmost care. Needless to say, he was the right man for the job. When The Avengers was released, not only did the film meet expectations, it exceeded them. There are a number of reasons the film works so well. First of all, it is unpretentious and maintains a good sense of fun throughout. Whedon inserted a number of award-worthy comical moments, such as the hilarious scene where the Hulk snags Loki and starts shaking him like a rag doll. There are many comical moments that make the film both unique and memorable. The dialogue is also natural, whereas in most comic book films it feels as if the actors are simply reciting lines that were written for them in the script. Another reason the film works so well is that every player truly gets their chance to shine. Whether it's Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye firing arrows into the skulls of fierce alien soldiers, or Scarlett Johansson kicking the crap out of Russian interrogators. We don't leave the film remembering just Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. We remember each individual for a specific reason. The actors are all perfectly suited to their parts. Since it's an ensemble piece, I won't go into too much detail about each performer. Robert Downey Jr. had, at this point, perfected Tony Stark's sarcastic attitude. He seems irresponsible and immature compared to the others. Chris Evans was an odd choice for the role of Captain America, but he manages to bring out both the character's undying patriotism and stoicism. He is a likable, all-American hero. Chris Hemsworth nails Thor's mighty attitude while also giving the character a sense of dignity. He has the hair of a stoner surfer dude, but he makes up for it by having the drive to protect humanity. Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow gets a little bit more of a backstory, which makes her much more relatable. She's also tough as nails. You sense she could snap your neck in the blink of an eye. Jeremy Renner doesn't have as much to do as the others, but he still has his moments. He is a total badass. Mark Ruffalo took over the role of Bruce Banner from Edward Norton, and he really does the character justice. Here's a Bruce Banner who acts like he hates himself. Also, the design of the Hulk is perfect, lean, and green. I've addressed all the main heroes, so now I think it is time for me to say some words about the villain. Loki really is your typical comic book villain who wants to rule the world by means of brute force. You have a hard time taking him seriously though, because most of the time, he acts like an unloved diva that only wants some attention. Because he feels neglected and unloved, he takes his anger out on the whole universe and everything in it. The way Tom Hiddleston portrays him is indeed memorable though. He's the type of snarky, rebellious baddie that has some serious self-worth issues. The Avengers is the type of film you can watch over and over again and discover something new each time. It is the best film Marvel has made to date, and it's also the best thing Joss Whedon has ever done.